It was 1967, deep winter in the northern Rockies, and I was alone with a gaping laceration that had split my forearm clean open. 3 inches long, half an inch deep, and bleeding steadily at about 40 milliliters per minute. I was 42 years old then, 15 years into my isolation, and I knew with absolute certainty that I had maybe 6 days before infection would set in. That's when I remembered something my grandmother showed me 40 years earlier, something that modern medicine had completely forgotten about. By the 5th day, the wound was already sealing. By the 6th day, there was barely any visible scarring. And here's what shocked me most. 30 years later, when I finally left the wilderness in 1997, that scar had nearly disappeared entirely. Everyone around me had been using the standard methods for centuries, but I discovered something that worked 3 times faster than the accepted techniques of my era. It was then that I understood the real reason infection rates were so high in wilderness settings. It wasn't that we didn't know how to treat wounds. We just forgot what actually worked. I was born in 1925, and I grew up watching my mother and grandmother treat cuts the way their ancestors had done for generations. But by the time I was 32 years old and decided to leave civilization in 1957, modern medicine had completely replaced that knowledge. Everyone was using the same approach: clean with whatever water they had, apply some kind of cloth binding, and hope the wound didn't get infected. Out there, in temperatures that would drop to 30 degrees below zero, with only snow and river water available, I made every mistake in that playbook. I had at least 4 major infections in my first 5 years of isolation. One infection in 1959 nearly cost me my life. My leg swelled to twice its normal size over just 8 days. I was feverish, confused, and I honestly thought that was going to be the end. I realized I was using the standard method everyone had taught me, and the standard method was failing dramatically. And I had maybe one chance to figure this out before the next serious injury happened. If you like this kind of practical knowledge that can save your life, subscribe to the channel. I post a new survival technique every week, all tested by me during 40 years in the wilderness. Alright, now let's get to what matters. There were 2 specific sources where I learned the real answer. The first was my grandmother, Margaret, who lived to be 92 years old and never had a serious infection her entire life. I remembered a conversation with her from 1935 when I was just 10 years old. She showed me her hands, which had dozens of scars from accidents over 70 years of living, and she said something I'd completely forgotten. The fastest healing I ever saw wasn't from the cleanest method. It was from letting the body do what it naturally knows how to do. The second source came from something I actually observed myself. In 1960, I noticed how animals in the wilderness handled their own wounds. A mountain lion I tracked for 3 days had a deep gash across its shoulder, probably from fighting with another predator. Within 6 days, that wound had stopped bleeding, and the infection risk had dropped dramatically. I realized the animal wasn't using water or cloth. It was using something else entirely, something that's actually in the wilderness around us constantly. Then it clicked. My grandmother's method had been based on understanding how the body naturally heals, and the animals had been using the same principle for thousands of years. The materials you need for this technique are remarkably simple, but the specifications matter enormously. First, you need fresh plant material, specifically from the Plantain family, scientifically known as Plantago major, though the common plantain is Plantago major and grows across North America. This plant has leaves that are approximately 3 to 4 inches long when mature, with prominent parallel veins running lengthwise. You'll find plantain growing in disturbed areas, near trails, or in clearings. The best time to harvest is during the growing season from April through September, and the leaves should be picked early in the morning when they have the highest concentration of active compounds. A single mature plant yields between 8 and 12 viable leaves per harvest. Second, you need raw honey, though not all honey works equally. The honey must be genuine, unpasteurized honey from a local source when possible. The glucose content should be around 38% and fructose around 31%, which you get when you have real honey. Pasteurized honey loses approximately 60% of its antimicrobial properties through the heating process. You need only 1 tablespoon per treatment, so a 2-pound jar will provide between 30 and 32 applications. Third, you need clean cloth, specifically something that won't stick to the wound tissue. Linen works best at 95% effectiveness. Cotton works at approximately 70%, and synthetic materials should be avoided entirely. The cloth should be cut into strips approximately 1 inch wide and 6 inches long, and you'll need 4 to 6 strips per application. Fourth, and this is crucial, you need fresh water that has been boiled and cooled. The water should reach a rolling boil for at least 3 minutes at sea level, longer at higher elevation. I had only river water in the wilderness, so I boiled it in a metal container over my fire. You need approximately 1 cup or 240 milliliters per cleaning session. The first major change in my technique involved the initial cleaning phase, which took me years to understand correctly. The standard method was to scrub the wound aggressively, but this causes additional tissue damage and increases bleeding from 15 to 40%, depending on how deep the cut is. Instead, I developed a gentler approach. I would take that boiled and cooled water, and I would let it flow over the wound slowly, allowing gravity to do the work rather than friction. This takes approximately 5 minutes per session. I would position my arm at a slight angle so the water ran from the upper edge of the wound downward, carrying away debris naturally. I never scrubbed. I never used cloth to clean the wound itself. The water temperature matters too. If it's too hot, above 104 degrees Fahrenheit, you damage healthy tissue. If it's too cold, below 60 degrees, the body's natural immune response becomes sluggish. The ideal temperature is approximately 98 to 102 degrees Fahrenheit, which is essentially body temperature. I would test this by placing my clean hand against the water for 5 seconds. If it felt pleasantly warm, not hot, then it was right. After 5 minutes of letting water flow, the wound would be as clean as it was ever going to get without damaging it further. The second major change involved what I applied immediately after cleaning. Here's where my grandmother's method becomes critical. I would take 2 to 4 fresh plantain leaves, depending on the wound size, and I would crush them between 2 smooth stones for approximately 30 seconds. Not pounding violently, just enough to break the cellular structure and release the juices. When you crush plantain leaves this way, you're activating compounds called mucilage and tannins. These compounds have approximately 85% effectiveness at reducing bleeding within the first minute of application, compared to 30% for simple cloth pressure alone. I would then apply these crushed leaves directly to the wound surface. Now here's the critical part. I didn't just slap them on and move on. I held them in place with firm but gentle pressure for exactly 8 minutes. During these 8 minutes, the tannins penetrate into the damaged tissue and begin causing vasoconstriction, which is the narrowing of blood vessels. This reduces bleeding dramatically. After 8 minutes, I could actually feel the difference. The bleeding would slow from a steady flow to maybe 1 or 2 drops per minute, sometimes even complete stopping. I would know it was working when the leaves themselves started to stick to the wound slightly from the blood beginning to coagulate. The third major change was understanding the role of honey and when to apply it. Most people think you should apply honey immediately, but that's actually incorrect and can actually slow healing by 2 to 4 days. Instead, I would wait between 18 and 24 hours after the initial injury before introducing honey. The reason is that during the first day, the wound needs to establish its own natural inflammatory response. Honey's powerful antimicrobial properties can actually interrupt that crucial first stage if applied too early. After 1 full day had passed, I would take 1 tablespoon of raw honey and mix it with the water that had cooled to body temperature, creating essentially a honey water mixture with a concentration of about 5%. I would pour this mixture over the wound slowly, taking approximately 2 minutes for the entire pour. The honey coats the wound tissue and creates a barrier against bacterial invasion. Honey has a water content of approximately 17%, but it also contains glucose oxidase, an enzyme that produces hydrogen peroxide when it contacts wound tissue. This happens at a concentration of around 1 to 2%, which is strong enough to kill bacteria, but weak enough that it doesn't damage healthy human tissue. The process is self-regulating, which is why it works so much better than applying commercial hydrogen peroxide directly. The fourth element addressed how to keep the wound stable and protected during the critical healing window. After I'd applied the honey wash, I would let the wound air dry for approximately 3 to 5 minutes until the honey had set slightly but before it had hardened completely. Then I would apply my prepared cloth strips. Here's the key difference from standard bandaging. I wasn't trying to compress the wound. I was creating a protective barrier that allowed airflow. The cloth strips would be laid across the wound in a crisscross pattern, not wrapped tightly around the limb. Each strip would be secured with a knot tied loosely at the sides, leaving approximately 1/8 of an inch of space between the cloth and the skin. If I pressed my finger against the bandage, I could easily indent it by about 1/4 inch. This slight pressure keeps debris out while allowing oxygen to reach the wound. Oxygen is crucial for healing. When tissue is completely sealed from air, anaerobic bacteria can thrive and cause deeper infections. I kept this bandage in place for approximately 6 to 8 hours before changing it. Some days I would change it 4 times. Other days, when the wound was stable and not bleeding, I might change it only twice. The fifth element involved the specific cleaning and reapplication sequence for days 2 through 5, the critical period when most infections develop. During this window, I would clean the wound every 6 to 8 hours with the boiled water technique, but only with water. No more plantain leaves, because by day 2 the initial bleeding phase is already concluded. After the water cleaned away any discharge or honey residue, I would assess the wound. The key indicator was what I call the color test. Healthy healing tissue should go from red on day 1 to pink by day 2, and to pale pink by day 3. If it stayed bright red or turned darker red or purplish, that meant infection was beginning to develop. On days 2 through 5, I would apply fresh honey water using that same 5% concentration, letting it dry for 3 to 5 minutes, then reapplying the crisscross cloth strips with the same loose binding technique. I never pulled the cloth tight. The entire concept of tight bandaging that cuts off circulation was part of the standard method that failed so consistently. Tight binding actually increases infection risk by approximately 38% compared to loose protective binding, which is what I learned through years of trial and painful error. The progression I observed was consistent. Day 2 showed significant reduction in bleeding. Day 3 showed the wound edges beginning to knit together. Day 4 showed visible skin bridging, where new tissue is actually starting to form across the gap. Day 5 showed the wound closing to approximately 75% of the original opening. My first real validation of this technique came in the winter of 1967. The 3-inch laceration on my forearm that I mentioned happened on January 14, 1967, at approximately 2 in the afternoon. I was processing firewood when my axe slipped on a frozen piece of oak and caught the inside of my forearm. I immediately applied the plantain leaves with the 8-minute pressure hold. By day 2, the bleeding had stopped almost completely. By day 3, the redness had shifted to that pink color that indicated proper healing. By day 5, the wound was more than 75% closed. By day 6, I could touch the area without any pain, and the opening had closed so completely that dirt couldn't get inside. I compared this directly to the infection I'd had in 1959, which had taken 42 days to fully resolve and left a scarring pattern that was still visible decades later. That 1959 infection swelled my entire leg from my knee to my ankle, creating pain levels I wouldn't wish on anyone. In contrast, the 1967 wound treated with this technique showed minimal swelling, maximum speed of closure, and almost no scarring. Over the decades I used this method, I treated at least 187 significant cuts, from minor lacerations to one severe gash that was 2 1/2 inches long and 1/4 inch deep. Of those 187 wounds, only 3 developed any infection at all, And those were minor surface infections that resolved within 3 days using the same technique. That success rate of 98.4% with the plantain and honey method compared to my previous success rate of roughly 40% using standard techniques was undeniable evidence. In today's world, this technique has even more practical applications than it did for me in the wilderness. If you're out hiking and you get a cut that needs immediate attention, plantain grows across North America and Europe, and it's the most common medicinal plant you can find in disturbed areas near trails. Raw honey is increasingly available through local beekeepers and farmers markets. The materials are inexpensive, typically costing less than $12 total, and they store indefinitely in a cool, dry place. You could keep a small kit in your backpack that weighs less than half a pound and costs less than the price of a decent knife. In emergency preparedness circles, this technique is being rediscovered after decades of being forgotten. I've spoken with emergency medicine professionals who've confirmed that the honey and plantain approach, while not a replacement for professional medical treatment for severe injuries, absolutely accelerates healing and reduces infection risk when professional treatment isn't immediately available. The lesson here goes deeper than just knowing a wound treatment technique. What I learned across 40 years in the wilderness is that sometimes the knowledge we've discarded is more valuable than the knowledge we've adopted. We abandoned these methods, not because they didn't work, but because we forgot why they worked. Modern medicine brought us remarkable advances, but it also meant we stopped understanding the principles behind traditional healing. That's what nearly cost me my life in 1959. That's what I recovered in 1967 and used successfully for decades afterward. Look, I spent 40 years learning these techniques the hardest way possible, alone in the cold, making mistakes that almost cost me my life. My goal with this channel is to give you all that knowledge without you having to go through what I went through. If you want to learn more techniques like this, things that really work when you need them most, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Leave a like if this video was useful, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a situation where a simple wound treatment like this would have saved you from a serious infection? And if you want to see another technique that saved me even more times, click on the video that will appear on screen. It's about treating hypothermia in deep wilderness conditions using only materials you can find around you. Remember that this channel presents fictional stories for educational purposes, with production assisted by artificial intelligence. See you next time and stay safe out there.